Attracting the right people does not begin with charisma, visibility, or clever words. It begins when inner alignment replaces inner chaos. The people surrounding life are never random additions. They are reflections of standards tolerated, discipline practiced, and identity embodied daily. What stays close mirrors what is permitted internally. Being overlooked, misunderstood, or surrounded by misaligned energy is not bad luck. It is feedback. Feedback that something inside has been negotiating instead of deciding. Negotiation weakens presence. Presence is what draws the right people without effort. Feeling tired does not cancel responsibility. Feeling discouraged does not justify drifting. Feeling small does not revoke authority over direction. Those states are conditions, not permissions. Waiting to feel strong before acting guarantees remaining unseen by those who respect strength. The right people are never attracted by need, explanation, or pursuit. They are drawn to steadiness under pressure. They stay because standards remain firm even when energy drops. Consistency outperforms intensity every time. If exhaustion is familiar, that means effort has been scattered. If confidence feels unstable, identity has been tied to outcomes. If motivation fades quickly, discipline has been treated as optional. Optional discipline produces optional respect. Life responds to what is embodied, not what is desired. Embodiment requires control when no one is watching, restraint when attention fades, and composure when recognition delays. Those traits quietly separate those who attract chaos from those who attract alignment. Nothing here will soothe discomfort. Discomfort is the signal that conditioning is required. What follows is not encouragement. It is calibration. If this pressure feels personal, that is because it is. If resistance rises, it means something necessary is being challenged. And if the desire to change patterns is stronger than the urge to escape this moment, then momentum already exists. If you are the person this book is talking to, then let's begin the transformation journey. Chapter 1. Internal order comes first. Attraction begins internally because behavior broadcasts internal alignment before words ever reach another person. People are drawn toward consistency, calm pressure, and controlled movement that signals reliability without explanation. Internal order means thoughts, actions, and reactions operate under one clear standard rather than emotional fluctuation. Disorder inside creates noise outside, and noise repels the very people worth keeping around long term. Attention follows clarity, and clarity only survives when decisions are made deliberately instead of reactively. A scattered internal state leaks through posture, tone, timing, and hesitation during ordinary interactions. Others sense uncertainty immediately, even when confidence is verbally claimed or theatrically displayed. Respect is not requested. It is felt when boundaries are enforced without announcement or emotional charge. Internal order requires deciding what behavior is acceptable from the self before judging anyone else's actions. Most people fail here because self-enforcement feels uncomfortable, repetitive, and invisible during early stages. Comfort resists discipline because discipline exposes every excuse that once felt reasonable or justified. Without internal rules, reactions govern behavior, and reactions are shaped by fatigue, fear, and momentary desire. That instability creates unpredictable energy, and unpredictable energy pushes away grounded individuals. The right people avoid chaos instinctively because chaos always demands unpaid emotional labor. Internal order reduces friction, simplifies choices, and removes the need for constant explanation or validation. Silence becomes easier when thoughts are organized and intentions are clear. Presence becomes heavier when attention is no longer fragmented by unresolved internal conflict. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is clarity applied consistently until identity stabilizes. Identity stabilized through repetition becomes visible without effort or performance. People trust what remains steady under pressure, not what spikes briefly under inspiration. Attraction grows from reliability because reliability feels safe without feeling weak or passive. Calm authority emerges when self-control is practiced privately and expressed publicly without aggression. Internal order creates emotional containment, and containment prevents unnecessary disclosure or reactive speech. Speaking less becomes natural when there is nothing to prove and nothing to defend. Those who overshare often seek reassurance for internal instability rather than genuine connection. Order removes that impulse by anchoring worth internally rather than externally. Energy returns gradually when actions stop conflicting with personal standards and long-term objectives. Fatigue often comes from inner contradiction, not workload or external demand. Aligning behavior with values reduces friction and restores usable energy over time. Confidence grows when promises made privately are honored consistently, even when no audience exists. Evidence accumulates quietly, and evidence reshapes self-perception more powerfully than affirmation ever could. Others respond to that shift instinctively, adjusting behavior without being instructed or corrected. Attraction strengthens when boundaries are enforced through action rather than explanation or emotional appeal. Saying no without guilt demonstrates internal order more clearly than any confident speech. Walking away without drama communicates standards more loudly than confrontation ever will. Internal order removes the need to convince, chase, or negotiate respect. The right people recognize discipline because disciplined individuals feel familiar and safe. Chaos seeks chaos, but order attracts order through resonance rather than effort. Maintaining internal order requires daily enforcement, especially during low-energy periods. Discipline practiced only during motivation collapses under pressure and exposes inconsistency. True order holds even when enthusiasm disappears and progress feels slow or invisible. That consistency creates gravity, and gravity draws aligned individuals naturally. People who value growth, restraint, and clarity recognize those traits immediately. Keeping the right people requires sustaining internal order after attraction occurs. Without maintenance, standards decay and relationships drift toward imbalance and resentment. Internal order ensures behavior remains predictable, fair, and grounded regardless of external circumstances. That stability encourages trust and long-term connection rather than temporary excitement. Attraction begins with order, but retention depends on consistency over time. This chapter establishes the foundation because nothing meaningful stands without internal structure enforced relentlessly. Chapter 2. Standards decide attraction. Attraction is governed by standards expressed through behavior rather than spoken expectations or stated desires. People respond to what is tolerated, reinforced, and repeated consistently over time without emotional explanation. Standards determine who feels comfortable approaching, staying, or slowly distancing without confrontation. Low standards invite chaos because chaos recognizes permission immediately and exploits it without hesitation. High standards create friction, and friction filters out those unwilling to regulate themselves. Standards are not attitudes or beliefs. Standards are actions enforced, especially when enforcement feels inconvenient. Saying nothing while tolerating disrespect communicates acceptance louder than any boundary speech ever could. Every uncorrected behavior becomes an agreement, and agreements shape the environment being lived daily. Attraction is never about being liked by everyone. Attraction is about being aligned with those capable of respect. Respect is not demanded verbally. Respect emerges when consequences exist and are applied calmly. Standards must be visible through consistent responses rather than explained repeatedly through emotional conversations. Repetition without enforcement teaches others that words have no weight or consequence. Individuals with strong standards do not threaten, argue, or persuade. They act decisively and move forward. That decisiveness creates psychological clarity, and clarity feels safe to disciplined individuals. Undisciplined individuals feel threatened by standards because standards expose internal disorganization. People who resist structure interpret standards as judgment, control, or arrogance. That reaction is information, not a problem requiring correction or reassurance. Attraction strengthens when emotional neutrality accompanies firm decisions without apology or justification. Apologizing for standards signals insecurity and invites negotiation where none should exist. Standards enforced silently carry more authority than standards defended emotionally. Consistency is the language of credibility, and credibility determines who stays long-term. When standards fluctuate based on mood or fatigue, attraction becomes unstable and unpredictable. Unpredictability attracts drama rather than reliability or growth-oriented individuals. The right people prefer environments where expectations are clear and behavior is regulated fairly. Fairness does not mean softness. Fairness means consistency applied regardless of convenience. Enforcing standards during low-energy moments builds internal respect that others eventually recognize. Self-respect grows when decisions reflect values rather than emotional comfort or avoidance. Attraction improves automatically when self-respect becomes non-negotiable and visible through action. People adjust behavior instinctively around those who enforce standards without hostility. Hostility invites power struggles, while calm firmness ends negotiations before they begin. Standards remove ambiguity, and ambiguity drains energy and creates unnecessary emotional labor. Clear boundaries conserve energy because fewer explanations and corrections are required. Those unwilling to meet standards will remove themselves quietly when enforcement remains steady. That departure is not loss. It is alignment occurring naturally without confrontation. Chasing approval erodes standards because it shifts authority outward rather than maintaining internal control. Approval-seeking behavior signals neediness, and neediness repels grounded individuals instinctively. Standards create selectivity, and selectivity increases perceived value without intentional display. People value what is not freely available to anyone without accountability. Maintaining standards requires accepting temporary solitude without lowering expectations prematurely. Loneliness tempts compromise, but compromise creates long-term dissatisfaction and resentment. The right people arrive later, but remain longer because alignment feels sustainable. Standards should be simple, enforceable, and rooted in behavior rather than personality judgments. Attacking character invites defensiveness, while correcting behavior maintains neutrality and control. Calm correction preserves dignity for both parties and reinforces authority without escalation. Over-explaining standards weakens them by implying uncertainty or negotiability. Silence after enforcement reinforces seriousness and discourages repeated testing. Testing is inevitable, especially early on, because others measure tolerance before adjusting behavior. Passing those tests consistently establishes reputation faster than any introduction ever could. Reputation forms through patterns observed quietly over time rather than through declarations or intentions. Once reputation solidifies, attraction stabilizes, and maintenance requires less effort. Standards must also be applied internally to prevent hypocrisy and resentment. Expecting behavior from others that is not practiced personally erodes credibility rapidly. Self-enforcement creates congruence, and congruence strengthens presence without performance. Presence grounded in congruence feels calm, controlled, and unshakable. That presence attracts individuals who value discipline over excitement. Excitement fades quickly, but discipline sustains long-term connection. Standards protect time, energy, and emotional capacity from unnecessary depletion. Conservation of resources allows focus on growth rather than constant repair or conflict. The environment shaped by standards reflects internal priorities and long-term objectives. Living within that environment reinforces discipline daily through feedback loops. Attraction becomes a byproduct rather than a pursuit when standards guide behavior consistently. Keeping the right people requires maintaining standards after familiarity develops. Familiarity invites testing again, and enforcement must remain unchanged. Relaxing standards for comfort invites gradual erosion and quiet resentment. Stability depends on vigilance, not intensity or emotional investment. Standards upheld calmly become invisible structures supporting lasting connection. This chapter establishes that attraction is not chemistry, but compliance with visible and enforced boundaries. Those capable of meeting standards stay, and those incapable leave without resistance or drama. The process requires patience, discipline, and emotional neutrality, maintained daily. Chapter 3. Energy signals everything. Energy communicates before language because the nervous system reads consistency faster than words can explain intent. People sense stability, agitation, or depletion immediately through posture, timing, and emotional regulation. Low energy is not weakness. Unmanaged energy is the true liability that distorts attraction. When energy leaks through complaint, urgency, or neediness, others feel pressure without understanding why. That pressure creates resistance, distance, or disengagement, even when intentions are positive. Controlled energy feels grounded, slow, and deliberate rather than rushed or emotionally charged. Deliberate movement signals confidence rooted in certainty rather than performance or validation-seeking behavior. Energy stabilizes when internal demands match external output without contradiction or overextension. Overextension often comes from attempting to compensate for insecurity through excessive effort or explanation. Excess effort communicates imbalance and invites others to either exploit or withdraw. Calm energy communicates self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency feels safe to disciplined individuals. Energy regulation requires awareness of internal state before attempting to influence external outcomes. Attempting attraction without energy control results in inconsistency that confuses and repels aligned people. People are drawn toward emotional containment because containment reduces uncertainty and unnecessary stimulation. Loud energy attracts attention briefly, but fails to sustain respect or long-term connection. Quiet energy holds presence longer because it does not demand response or reassurance. Presence grows when reactions are delayed, measured, and proportionate to the situation. Immediate reactions often reveal emotional dependency or lack of internal structure. Slowing responses creates space for clarity and prevents regret-driven communication. Energy conserved through restraint becomes available during moments that actually require engagement. Many individuals exhaust themselves responding to everything, leaving nothing for what matters. Disciplined energy allocation communicates priorities without explanation or verbal boundary setting. Others adjust behavior naturally around those who respond selectively rather than compulsively. Selective engagement signals value because it implies internal filtering and self-command. Energy alignment means thoughts, words, and actions operate at the same pace and intensity. Misalignment creates tension that others feel as discomfort or unpredictability. Calm consistency reduces that tension and stabilizes interaction patterns. Energy regulation also prevents emotional oversharing that burdens others unnecessarily. Sharing without containment seeks relief rather than connection, and relief-seeking erodes attraction quickly. Strong presence allows sharing selectively without transferring emotional weight onto others. Emotional weight should be carried internally before being expressed externally. Carrying weight builds strength, and strength changes how energy is perceived instinctively. People trust those who appear capable of handling pressure without collapse or dramatization. Pressure reveals energy management habits more clearly than calm environments ever could. Under pressure, controlled energy remains steady rather than escalating or withdrawing completely. That steadiness attracts individuals who value reliability during difficulty. Energy spikes followed by crashes create instability that discourages long-term engagement. Stability requires pacing effort rather than oscillating between extremes of intensity and withdrawal. Pacing communicates foresight and self-knowledge rather than impulse or emotional hunger. Energy also reflects self-respect through how time and attention are distributed. Giving energy indiscriminately communicates low standards and unclear priorities. Withholding energy strategically communicates discernment without verbal justification. Discernment attracts disciplined individuals who respect boundaries instinctively. Energy leaks often occur through internal dialogue filled with self-criticism or resentment. That internal noise drains capacity and subtly alters external behavior. Reducing internal conflict restores energy more effectively than rest alone ever could. Alignment reduces friction, and reduced friction frees usable energy for purposeful action. Purposeful energy feels directed rather than scattered or reactive. Direction creates momentum, and momentum attracts individuals moving with intention. Aimless energy drifts and attracts similarly unstructured individuals. Attraction follows direction because direction implies commitment and self-trust. Self-trust becomes visible when decisions are executed without excessive deliberation or regret. Energy strengthens when decisions are final and revisited only when evidence demands adjustment. Constant reconsideration drains energy and signals uncertainty. Uncertainty invites influence, control, or disengagement from others. Controlled energy resists external pressure because internal decisions are already made. That resistance feels grounded rather than defensive or aggressive. Defensive energy repels because it implies vulnerability or fear of loss. Grounded energy attracts because it implies abundance of choice and internal stability. Abundance is felt through calm pacing rather than excessive availability. Availability without discernment diminishes perceived value and drains energy reserves. Limiting availability protects energy and increases attraction simultaneously. Energy maintenance requires saying no internally before saying no externally. Internal refusal prevents resentment and preserves emotional neutrality. Neutrality strengthens presence because it removes emotional charge from decisions. Decisions without charge feel firm and final, rather than negotiable or personal. Energy also reflects sleep, nutrition, and physical maintenance, which influence mental regulation directly. Neglecting the body undermines mental control regardless of intention or discipline elsewhere. Physical care supports energy stability, which supports emotional containment automatically. Consistency in basic maintenance creates a reliable baseline others can sense. Reliable baselines reduce unpredictability and encourage long-term trust. Trust grows when energy remains familiar rather than erratic across situations. Erratic energy creates vigilance in others, which undermines relaxation and connection. Relaxed connection emerges when energy signals safety through predictability. Predictability does not mean boredom. Predictability means emotional reliability. Reliability attracts those capable of commitment and deters those seeking stimulation through chaos. Energy signals everything before conversation begins and long after words end. Managing energy intentionally shapes attraction without effort, persuasion, or explanation. This chapter reinforces that control of energy precedes influence, connection, and retention. Those who regulate energy attract order, while those who neglect it invite instability repeatedly. Chapter 4. Silence builds gravity. Silence is not absence. Silence is controlled presence that refuses to leak energy unnecessarily. Speaking less is not withdrawal. It is discipline applied to communication with intent and restraint. Words carry weight only when they are scarce, deliberate, and aligned with action already taken. Excessive explanation weakens authority by inviting interpretation, negotiation, or emotional debate. Silence removes those openings and forces behavior to speak clearly without interference. People lean toward what feels grounded, and grounded presence often arrives quietly rather than dramatically. Loudness seeks attention, while silence commands it through contrast and composure. Gravity develops when reactions are contained and responses are measured rather than immediate. Immediate speech often reveals emotional urgency rather than clarity or confidence. Urgency communicates need, and need shifts power outward toward approval or reassurance. Silence retains power internally by preventing unnecessary disclosure of thought, doubt, or intention. Intention, protected by silence, matures into execution without external interference. Interference thrives on information, and silence limits access to that information naturally. Others adjust behavior around silence because silence creates uncertainty that demands respect. Respect forms when unpredictability is paired with consistency rather than chaos. Consistent silence signals discipline rather than avoidance or fear. Avoidance withdraws under pressure, while disciplined silence holds steady without explanation. Holding steady communicates strength because it suggests self-trust and emotional regulation. Emotional regulation attracts those capable of managing their own inner state responsibly. Those who cannot regulate themselves feel exposed by silence and attempt to provoke response. Provocation tests boundaries, and silence often passes the test more effectively than confrontation. Responding selectively demonstrates control without escalating tension or draining energy. Selective response trains others on what behavior receives engagement. Engagement is a resource, and resources shape behavior through availability. Withholding engagement from low-value behavior discourages repetition without argument. Silence becomes instructional when paired with consistent standards and follow-through. Words are unnecessary when patterns are clear and consequences predictable. Predictability builds trust, and trust attracts individuals seeking stability rather than stimulation. Silence also protects focus by reducing mental clutter created through excessive conversation. Conversation without purpose fragments attention and weakens presence over time. Presence strengthens when attention remains anchored internally rather than scattered externally. Anchored attention supports calm decision-making under pressure. Decisions made calmly tend to be final rather than reactive or regret-driven. Final decisions reduce internal noise and free mental space for execution. Execution reinforces credibility more than any explanation or reassurance. Credibility felt through action reduces the need for persuasion entirely. Silence supports execution by conserving cognitive and emotional resources. Resources conserved allow sustained effort during difficult periods without burnout. Burnout often follows emotional leakage rather than workload alone. Emotional leakage occurs when feelings are expressed prematurely instead of processed internally. Processing internally builds capacity and resilience gradually. Resilience alters posture, timing, and tone in subtle ways others notice instinctively. Those subtle signals shape attraction more powerfully than overt confidence displays. Silence also discourages comparison by limiting exposure to external opinions. Comparison distorts self-perception and drains energy through unnecessary evaluation. Reduced comparison stabilizes identity and strengthens internal reference points. Strong internal reference points reduce dependence on feedback or validation. Validation-seeking behavior erodes attraction because it transfers authority outward. Silence recenters authority internally by removing the impulse to seek confirmation. Confirmation becomes unnecessary when evidence accumulates through consistent behavior. Evidence builds slowly and invisibly, but its effects are durable and cumulative. Others respond to accumulated evidence without needing explanation or context. Silence allows evidence to stand alone without dilution or overstatement. Overstatement weakens credibility by suggesting insecurity or impatience. Patience expressed through silence communicates long-term orientation rather than short-term gratification. Long-term orientation attracts individuals capable of commitment and delayed reward. Silence also prevents emotional escalation during disagreement or misunderstanding. Escalation feeds conflict, while silence creates space for de-escalation naturally. De-escalation preserves dignity and control without sacrificing standards. Silence does not mean compliance. Silence means choosing the most effective response. Effectiveness is measured by outcome rather than emotional relief. Emotional relief through venting often creates new problems rather than resolving existing ones. Problems resolved quietly stay resolved because they do not invite repeated negotiation. Silence simplifies social dynamics by reducing unnecessary complexity. Complexity often arises from excessive explanation layered over simple boundaries. Clear boundaries enforced quietly feel firm and non-negotiable. Negotiation ends when silence follows enforcement without emotional reaction. That ending teaches others how interaction will proceed moving forward. Teaching through behavior rather than instruction preserves authority and reduces resistance. Silence also supports listening, which reveals information without exposing internal state. Information gathered quietly informs better decisions and stronger positioning. Strong positioning attracts respect because it reflects awareness and foresight. Foresight reduces impulsivity, and reduced impulsivity stabilizes energy further. Stability compounds attraction by creating an environment of predictability and calm. Calm environments invite disciplined individuals and repel those dependent on chaos. Silence builds gravity by slowing interaction and increasing perceived weight. Weight changes how words land when they are finally spoken. Few words spoken deliberately carry more influence than many words spoken emotionally. Influence grounded in restraint lasts longer and requires less maintenance. Maintenance becomes easier when behavior remains aligned consistently. Alignment strengthens silence because there is nothing to hide or defend. Defense invites attack, while silence removes the target entirely. The right people understand silence and do not demand constant explanation. Those who demand constant explanation reveal insecurity or entitlement. Entitlement drains energy and undermines respect over time. Silence filters entitlement naturally without confrontation or emotional cost. Gravity built through silence attracts alignment and repels misalignment simultaneously. This chapter establishes silence as a tool for presence, authority, and retention. Mastering silence strengthens attraction without effort and sustains connection without exhaustion. Chapter 5. Emotional control retains respect. Emotional control is not suppression. Emotional control is command applied before expression occurs. Respect remains when emotions are governed internally rather than discharged outward for relief. Uncontrolled emotion transfers burden onto others and quietly erodes attraction over time. People respect those who can feel deeply without making those feelings someone else's responsibility. Responsibility for emotion begins internally through recognition, regulation, and delayed response. Delayed response creates space for reason to lead rather than impulse or fear. Impulse-driven behavior reveals instability and invites either pity or exploitation. Stability attracts respect because it signals reliability during uncertainty or pressure. Emotional reactions that fluctuate based on mood undermine trust, even when intentions remain good. Trust grows when responses remain familiar regardless of circumstance or fatigue. Familiar responses reduce anxiety and create psychological safety. Safety attracts individuals capable of long-term commitment and mutual respect. Emotional volatility demands constant management and drains energy from everyone involved. Drained energy weakens standards and invites resentment silently. Resentment builds when emotions are indulged rather than processed responsibly. Processing emotion internally strengthens capacity and sharpens judgment. Judgment guided by clarity produces consistent behavior rather than reactive patterns. Reactive patterns teach others to anticipate unpredictability and prepare defensively. Defensive behavior undermines openness and erodes connection gradually. Emotional control allows openness without vulnerability becoming exposure. Exposure without control invites misuse, misunderstanding, or loss of authority. Authority, maintained through calm emotional presence, feels natural rather than imposed. Calm presence steadies interactions and reduces unnecessary conflict. Conflict often arises not from disagreement, but from emotional escalation layered onto simple issues. Removing escalation simplifies resolution or disengagement without damage. Emotional neutrality during disagreement preserves dignity and keeps standards intact. Dignity attracts respect more reliably than emotional intensity ever could. Intensity without control feels unsafe to disciplined individuals. Emotional restraint signals strength because it demonstrates choice rather than compulsion. Compulsion erodes credibility by implying loss of self-command. Self-command becomes visible when emotion does not dictate speech or action. Speech delivered calmly carries weight because it is not fueled by urgency. Urgency signals fear of loss, and fear undermines authority quietly. Authority, rooted in composure, reassures others without needing explanation. Reassurance given through stability lasts longer than reassurance given through words. Emotional control also prevents over-attachment to outcomes or people prematurely. Over-attachment distorts perception and leads to compromise of standards. Compromised standards invite imbalance and eventual dissatisfaction. Emotional independence preserves clarity and prevents bargaining with self-respect. Independence does not mean detachment. Independence means stability, regardless of response received. Responses from others become information rather than validation or threat. Treating responses as information maintains objectivity and emotional balance. Objectivity strengthens decision-making and reduces regret. Regret often follows emotional decisions made without pause or reflection. Pausing before action interrupts destructive cycles and restores agency. Agency felt internally translates into confidence perceived externally. Confidence grounded in control feels calm rather than forceful or loud. Loud confidence compensates for internal doubt and invites challenge. Quiet confidence discourages challenge because it feels settled. Emotional control also prevents emotional dumping disguised as honesty. Honesty without restraint shifts burden and erodes respect over time. Respect remains when honesty is timed, measured, and purposeful. Purposeful expression strengthens connection rather than exhausting it. Emotional flooding overwhelms interaction and encourages distance as self-protection. Distance grows when emotions are unpredictable or unmanaged. Managed emotion allows closeness without instability. Stability supports intimacy without dependency or control dynamics. Control dynamics arise when emotions are used to influence rather than understand. Influence through emotion creates imbalance and resentment. Balanced interaction requires emotional responsibility from all parties involved. Emotional responsibility begins with self-regulation rather than expectation of accommodation. Expecting accommodation weakens autonomy and attracts caretaking rather than partnership. Partnership thrives on mutual control rather than emotional negotiation. Emotional control also protects focus during critical moments requiring execution. Execution falters when attention is consumed by internal turbulence. Turbulence drains energy and clouds judgment during decisive periods. Clear judgment attracts trust from those observing consistency over time. Observed consistency builds reputation silently and steadily. Reputation, rooted in emotional control, endures pressure without collapse. Collapse reveals lack of preparation rather than lack of strength. Preparation includes training emotional response before challenges arrive. Training occurs through daily discipline, not during crisis itself. Crisis reveals habits already practiced rather than creating new capacity. Emotional discipline practiced privately becomes visible publicly without intention. Visibility attracts aligned individuals and repels those seeking emotional volatility. Volatility excites briefly but exhausts quickly and leaves damage behind. Damage undermines long-term retention even when attraction initially succeeds. Retention depends on feeling secure rather than stimulated constantly. Emotional control creates security through predictability and fairness. Fairness applied without emotion feels impartial and trustworthy. Trust grows when emotions do not distort treatment or expectations. Distortion breeds suspicion and disengagement gradually. Emotional clarity removes distortion and strengthens alignment. Alignment supports long-term connection built on respect rather than intensity. Intensity fades, but respect remains when emotional control holds. Holding control requires vigilance during fatigue, stress, or disappointment. Those moments define character and determine attraction outcomes. Emotional discipline retained under strain builds lasting gravity. Gravity keeps the right people present without effort or pursuit. This chapter establishes emotional control as essential for sustaining respect after attraction occurs. Without control, attraction decays. With control, connection stabilizes and deepens. Chapter 6. Remove neediness completely. Neediness repels because it signals internal dependence rather than self-command or stability. Dependence transfers authority outward and invites imbalance in every interaction that follows. People feel pressure when they sense expectation attached to attention, time, or response. Pressure creates resistance, and resistance quietly dissolves attraction without confrontation. Removing neediness begins with recognizing where validation has replaced internal evidence. Validation seeking appears through over-availability, rapid response, and excessive accommodation. Accommodation without alignment communicates fear of loss rather than generosity or strength. Fear-driven behavior invites testing because it suggests boundaries are flexible under pressure. Flexible boundaries invite exploitation or disengagement depending on the other person's character. Removing neediness requires choosing alignment over approval consistently and without explanation. Approval is temporary, but alignment sustains self-respect and long-term credibility. Credibility attracts disciplined individuals who value autonomy and mutual respect. Autonomy felt through calm independence reassures others without demanding reassurance in return. Independence does not isolate. Independence stabilizes connection by removing emotional obligation. Obligation poisons attraction by converting choice into duty. Duty erodes enthusiasm and replaces presence with resentment. Removing neediness restores choice on both sides, which preserves dignity and respect. Dignity attracts those capable of honoring boundaries without manipulation. Neediness often disguises itself as kindness, availability, or honesty. Kindness without limits becomes self-neglect and communicates low internal value. Availability without discernment signals lack of priorities and unclear self-direction. Honesty without restraint burdens others with emotional processing they did not consent to. Consent matters because emotional weight alters power dynamics subtly. Balanced power supports healthy attraction and retention. Imbalanced power breeds control, caretaking, or withdrawal. Removing neediness corrects imbalance by recentering authority internally. Authority, internalized, stabilizes behavior regardless of response received. Responses become information rather than affirmation or rejection. Treating responses as information preserves objectivity and emotional neutrality. Neutrality prevents spirals of interpretation and self-doubt. Self-doubt drains energy and undermines presence during interaction. Presence strengthens when attention remains inwardly anchored rather than outwardly dependent. Anchored attention communicates self-sufficiency and calm confidence. Calm confidence attracts without effort because it feels non-invasive. Invasive energy arises when expectation accompanies engagement. Expectation pressures others to perform emotionally. Performance-based interaction exhausts quickly and collapses under stress. Removing expectation allows interaction to breathe naturally. Natural interaction reveals compatibility without forcing outcomes. Forcing outcomes exposes neediness and invites resistance. Resistance signals misalignment that should be respected rather than challenged. Respecting misalignment preserves energy and self-respect simultaneously. Pursuing misalignment wastes resources and reinforces dependency habits. Removing neediness requires tolerating uncertainty without seeking immediate resolution. Uncertainty tolerated builds emotional strength and patience. Patience changes pacing and reduces impulsive communication. Impulsive communication exposes vulnerability before trust exists. Trust must be earned through consistency, not accelerated through disclosure. Disclosure without trust shifts burden and reduces perceived stability. Stability attracts those seeking long-term connection rather than temporary reassurance. Reassurance-seeking behavior communicates insecurity regardless of verbal confidence. Verbal confidence without behavioral independence feels hollow and performative. Performance collapses under sustained interaction and reveals underlying need. Removing neediness requires reducing emotional investment until evidence supports escalation. Evidence accumulates through observed consistency rather than promises or intensity. Intensity feels exciting, but masks imbalance and accelerates disappointment. Slower pacing protects judgment and preserves attraction longer. Slowness communicates abundance of choice rather than fear of loss. Fear of loss drives compromise of standards quietly. Compromised standards invite imbalance and eventual resentment. Removing neediness restores standards by making them non-negotiable again. Non-negotiable standards simplify decision-making and reduce emotional labor. Emotional labor drains energy and fuels silent dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction erodes connection even when attraction initially exists. Removing neediness preserves energy for growth and purposeful action. Purposeful action strengthens identity and reinforces self-trust. Self-trust reduces reliance on external affirmation automatically. Affirmation becomes appreciated rather than required. Appreciation without dependence feels healthy and reciprocal. Reciprocal interaction attracts disciplined individuals capable of mutual investment. Neediness attracts caretakers, controllers, or avoidant behavior patterns. Those patterns create cycles of instability and frustration. Removing neediness breaks those cycles by changing internal posture. Posture affects tone, timing, and behavioral choice subtly. Subtle changes alter attraction dynamics significantly over time. Time reveals consistency, and consistency filters alignment naturally. Removing neediness also means allowing silence without anxiety. Anxiety during silence exposes attachment to response rather than presence. Comfortable silence communicates security and self-assurance. Security attracts those seeking calm rather than stimulation. Removing neediness requires daily reinforcement, especially during loneliness or fatigue. Fatigue tempts compromise, but compromise reinforces dependency patterns. Resisting compromise during fatigue builds discipline and strengthens character. Character becomes visible through restraint rather than declaration. Declaration without restraint invites skepticism and testing. Testing reveals whether neediness has truly been removed. Passing tests consistently builds reputation quietly. Reputation attracts the right people without pursuit. Removing neediness shifts attraction from effort to inevitability. Inevitable attraction feels calm, grounded, and sustainable. Sustainability determines who stays when novelty fades. Novelty fades quickly, but independence remains compelling. Independence paired with respect sustains long-term connection. This chapter establishes that neediness must be eliminated completely, not managed or justified. Partial removal leaves leaks that drain attraction over time. Complete removal restores authority, balance, and self-respect. With neediness gone, attraction becomes selective, stable, and retainable. Chapter 7. Consistency outlasts intensity. Intensity attracts attention quickly, but consistency determines who remains when novelty dissolves. People mistake intensity for commitment because intensity feels dramatic and emotionally charged. Drama fades, and what remains is behavior repeated when emotion settles and excitement disappears. Consistency communicates reliability because it proves action is not dependent on mood or circumstance. Reliability attracts disciplined individuals who value predictability without boredom or control. Inconsistent behavior creates vigilance, and vigilance prevents relaxation and long-term connection. Relaxation only appears when patterns stabilize and expectations become clear through repetition. Repetition without explanation builds trust faster than reassurance or verbal commitment. Commitment, spoken without consistent action, erodes credibility and invites skepticism quietly. Skepticism creates distance, even when politeness remains intact. Distance grows when words and actions diverge repeatedly. Divergence signals internal conflict or lack of self-command. Self-command becomes visible when behavior remains steady across high and low energy periods. Low energy periods reveal discipline more accurately than motivated bursts ever could. Anyone can perform briefly. Few maintain standards without emotional reward. Maintenance without reward builds character and signals long-term orientation. Long-term orientation attracts those capable of patience and delayed gratification. Delayed gratification stabilizes pacing and prevents emotional overinvestment early. Overinvestment distorts judgment and creates pressure that repels aligned individuals. Consistency removes pressure by replacing urgency with reliability. Reliability feels safe because it reduces unpredictability and emotional labor. Emotional labor drains attraction because it creates imbalance and fatigue. Consistent behavior reduces emotional labor by simplifying interaction. Simplicity preserves energy and supports sustainable connection. Intensity often overpromises and underdelivers because it relies on emotional momentum. Momentum collapses when reality demands repetition rather than inspiration. Consistency thrives during repetition because repetition is its natural environment. Routine does not mean stagnation. Routine means standards enforced daily. Daily enforcement builds identity and shapes how others perceive presence. Presence rooted in consistency feels grounded rather than performative. Performance requires audience response, while consistency exists independently of reaction. Independence from reaction preserves authority and self-respect. Authority grounded in consistency discourages testing over time. Testing decreases when boundaries remain unchanged across situations. Boundaries enforced inconsistently invite negotiation and eventual erosion. Erosion undermines attraction gradually without dramatic conflict. Consistency prevents erosion by reinforcing limits quietly. Quiet reinforcement feels firm and non-negotiable. Non-negotiable standards simplify decision-making for everyone involved. Simplicity attracts disciplined individuals who prefer clarity over emotional ambiguity. Ambiguity excites briefly, but destabilizes long-term engagement. Consistency stabilizes by aligning expectations with observable behavior. Observable behavior becomes reference rather than promises or intentions. Intentions fluctuate. Behavior reveals priorities truthfully. Priorities demonstrated through consistency earn respect without demand. Respect built this way persists during disagreement or stress. Stress exposes habits already practiced rather than creating new ones. Habits formed through consistency hold under pressure. Pressure reveals who remains steady and who collapses into reaction. Reaction-driven behavior undermines trust because it feels unpredictable. Predictability does not reduce attraction when paired with growth and purpose. Growth expressed consistently signals progress without chaos. Chaos attracts attention, but repels retention. Retention requires stability that supports trust and collaboration. Collaboration emerges when behavior is reliable enough to depend upon. Dependence on reliability differs from emotional dependence significantly. Emotional dependence drains, while structural reliability empowers. Empowerment attracts those seeking partnership rather than caretaking. Caretaking dynamics arise when inconsistency forces others to compensate emotionally. Compensation breeds resentment and imbalance. Consistency prevents compensation by maintaining equilibrium. Equilibrium supports mutual respect and balanced contribution. Balanced contribution feels fair and sustainable. Sustainability determines who remains after initial excitement fades. Excitement fades naturally. Consistency remains by design. Designing consistency requires intentional routines and non-negotiable standards. Non-negotiable standards remove decision fatigue and emotional debate. Debate weakens authority by implying uncertainty. Certainty expressed through repeated action feels calm and grounded. Calm, grounded behavior attracts individuals seeking peace rather than stimulation. Stimulation-driven attraction burns out quickly and leaves dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction undermines retention even when attraction existed initially. Consistency preserves satisfaction by meeting expectations steadily. Expectations formed through observation are more accurate than expectations formed through words. Words create images. Behavior confirms reality. Reality shapes trust and guides emotional investment responsibly. Responsible investment prevents disappointment and conflict later. Conflict often arises when intensity creates unrealistic expectations early. Consistency prevents inflation of expectation by pacing progress realistically. Realistic pacing supports patience and mutual understanding. Understanding grows when behavior remains coherent over time. Coherence strengthens identity and presence. Presence rooted in coherence feels authentic without disclosure or performance. Authenticity without consistency collapses under time. Time tests patterns relentlessly without bias. Passing time tests builds reputation quietly. Reputation attracts aligned individuals automatically. Automatic attraction requires less effort and produces higher quality connection. Consistency also supports recovery after mistakes without destabilizing identity. Mistakes handled consistently reinforce trust rather than erode it. Trust grows when correction is predictable and fair. Fairness applied consistently builds safety and respect. Respect sustains attraction beyond circumstance or mood. Circumstances change. Consistency anchors connection. Anchored connection withstands stress without excessive repair. Repair becomes necessary when inconsistency creates damage repeatedly. Avoiding damage preserves energy and focus for growth. Growth pursued consistently compounds progress over time. Compounding progress attracts those oriented toward development rather than distraction. Distraction thrives on intensity spikes and novelty. Novelty fades. Consistency compounds. Compounding yields depth rather than surface-level engagement. Depth supports long-term retention without force or persuasion. Persuasion becomes unnecessary when consistency speaks clearly. Clear signals reduce confusion and emotional negotiation. Negotiation drains attraction by introducing power struggle. Consistency removes struggle by setting patterns beyond debate. Patterns guide behavior naturally. Natural alignment feels effortless because it reflects shared values. Shared values emerge through consistent behavior, not declarations. Declarations without consistency invite doubt and testing. Testing fades when consistency remains unchanged. Remaining unchanged under pressure signals strength and maturity. Maturity attracts disciplined individuals capable of commitment. Commitment thrives in environments of stability and trust. Stability created through consistency outlasts intensity every time. This chapter establishes that consistency is the true force behind attraction that endures. Those who remain value steadiness more than excitement, and that steadiness must be practiced daily. Chapter 8. Authority without assertion. Authority that needs to be asserted is already compromised by insecurity or inconsistency. Real authority exists before words are spoken and remains after interaction ends. Assertion seeks compliance through force, tone, or repetition, rather than alignment through behavior. Alignment lasts longer because it is voluntary and grounded in respect. Respect emerges when standards are enforced quietly and consequences are applied without emotion. Emotion attached to authority invites challenge because it signals personal investment rather than principle. Principle feels impersonal and stable, while emotion feels negotiable and reactive. Authority without assertion relies on predictability rather than intimidation or persuasion. Predictability communicates fairness, and fairness builds trust over time. Trust attracts disciplined individuals who prefer structure without control. Control dynamics arise when authority is performed rather than embodied. Embodied authority feels calm, slow, and deliberate rather than loud or urgent. Urgency suggests fear of loss, which undermines credibility quietly. Credibility strengthens when decisions are made once and reinforced consistently through action. Repetition of action teaches faster than repetition of words. Words invite debate. Action ends discussion naturally. Ending discussion without hostility preserves dignity for all parties involved. Dignity maintained during enforcement increases long-term respect. Respect deepens when authority does not humiliate, threaten, or explain excessively. Excess explanation signals doubt and invites negotiation where none should exist. Negotiation drains authority by shifting power outward. Authority must remain internal to remain stable. Internal authority expresses itself through posture, timing, and restraint. Restraint communicates confidence because it shows choice rather than compulsion. Compulsion exposes emotional dependence on outcome or approval. Dependence erodes authority because it invites leverage. Authority without assertion removes leverage by reducing emotional attachment to response. Response becomes information rather than validation. Validation seeking undermines authority by outsourcing self-worth. Self-worth stabilized internally strengthens authority automatically. Authority, grounded in self-respect, feels natural and unforced. Others sense it through consistency rather than proclamation. Proclamation invites skepticism, while consistency dissolves it quietly. Authority also depends on selective engagement rather than omnipresence. Being available to everything diminishes authority by signaling lack of priorities. Priorities enforced through absence communicate value without explanation. Absence used intentionally teaches others what behavior earns access. Access controlled calmly reinforces boundaries without confrontation. Confrontation escalates unnecessarily and drains energy. Authority conserved through calm action remains sustainable. Sustainability matters because authority must endure time and familiarity. Familiarity often erodes respect when authority is performative. Performative authority collapses under prolonged exposure. Embodied authority strengthens under exposure because behavior remains unchanged. Unchanged behavior communicates stability and reliability. Reliability attracts those capable of responsibility and commitment. Authority without assertion also requires emotional neutrality during disagreement. Disagreement handled calmly demonstrates confidence in position without defensiveness. Defensiveness invites attack by exposing vulnerability. Neutrality removes incentive to attack or challenge. Challenges decrease when outcomes are predictable and consequences consistent. Consistency teaches faster than correction or argument. Arguments personalize authority and create power struggles. Power struggles undermine attraction by creating tension and instability. Authority without assertion avoids struggle by refusing emotional engagement. Refusal does not mean avoidance. Refusal means choosing effectiveness over relief. Relief seeking through venting or lecturing feels satisfying briefly, but weakens position long-term. Long-term strength requires restraint practiced daily. Daily restraint builds habit and shapes presence. Presence shaped by restraint feels heavy and grounded. Grounded presence commands attention without demanding it. Demand creates resistance, while gravity draws alignment naturally. Gravity develops when actions match values consistently. Matching actions and values removes internal conflict and sharpens authority. Internal conflict leaks through tone and timing subtly. Subtle leaks undermine authority even when words appear confident. Eliminating leaks requires discipline during fatigue and disappointment. Fatigue tempts assertion because patience feels expensive. Assertion during fatigue creates damage that must be repaired later. Repair drains energy and weakens trust. Authority without assertion prevents damage by avoiding escalation entirely. Avoiding escalation preserves relationships without compromising standards. Compromising standards to preserve comfort undermines authority silently. Authority must be protected even when discomfort arises. Discomfort tolerated builds resilience and strengthens posture. Posture communicates authority through stillness rather than movement. Excess movement signals agitation or uncertainty. Stillness signals control and deliberation. Deliberation suggests foresight and self-command. Self-command attracts respect without request. Requesting respect undermines authority by implying it is optional. Authority assumes respect through behavior rather than asks for it verbally. Verbal demands for respect reveal insecurity or loss of control. Control maintained through calm enforcement remains intact. Authority without assertion also depends on listening more than speaking. Listening gathers information without exposing internal state. Information informs better decisions and strengthens positioning. Strong positioning reduces need for assertion entirely. Assertion becomes unnecessary when outcomes align naturally. Alignment feels effortless because it is supported by structure. Structure provides clarity and reduces emotional negotiation. Negotiation drains authority by reopening settled decisions. Decisions must remain settled to maintain credibility. Credibility compounds through time and consistent enforcement. Compounded credibility attracts those who recognize stability immediately. Stability feels rare because many rely on intensity rather than discipline. Discipline sustains authority without performance. Performance requires audience reaction power, while discipline exists regardless of observation. Authority rooted in discipline remains present even in absence. Absence tests authority because behavior continues without supervision. Authority that survives absence is genuine and durable. Durability determines retention after attraction occurs. Retention fails when authority collapses under familiarity. Familiarity invites testing. Authority without assertion passes tests quietly. Passing tests reduces future challenges and stabilizes interaction. Stable interaction preserves energy and focus for growth. Growth, supported by authority, attracts individuals oriented toward development. Development-oriented individuals respect structure and boundaries naturally. Natural respect requires no assertion. Authority without assertion becomes the default state. Default authority simplifies life by reducing conflict and explanation. Explanation drains energy and invites misinterpretation. Silence paired with consistent action eliminates misinterpretation gradually. Gradual clarity lasts longer than dramatic enforcement. Dramatic enforcement creates fear rather than respect. Fear compliance fades when threat disappears. Respect compliance remains when authority is calm and consistent. Authority without assertion produces respect compliance rather than fear compliance. Respect compliance supports retention because it feels voluntary. Voluntary alignment feels dignified and sustainable. Sustainability determines who stays when novelty fades. Authority practiced daily without assertion sustains attraction and deepens connection. This chapter establishes authority as an internal state expressed through restraint, consistency, and action. When authority is embodied, assertion becomes unnecessary and attraction stabilizes naturally. Chapter 9. Familiarity must not weaken you. Familiarity erodes attraction when standards relax and discipline quietly dissolves over time. Early respect often fades because behavior shifts once comfort replaces awareness. Comfort tempts complacency, and complacency signals lowered self-regard without verbal admission. Lowered self-regard invites testing, disregard, or gradual emotional withdrawal. Maintaining attraction requires holding the same internal posture regardless of time or closeness. Closeness should increase trust, not excuse inconsistency or emotional exposure without restraint. Oversharing during familiarity transfers emotional weight and disrupts balance subtly. Balance preserves respect by preventing emotional dependence from forming unnoticed. Dependence grows when boundaries blur and standards soften quietly. Softened standards invite entitlement, and entitlement corrodes attraction relentlessly. Entitlement thrives where enforcement weakens under the excuse of closeness. Closeness does not remove the need for discipline. Closeness demands greater discipline. Greater discipline protects intimacy by preventing power imbalance and resentment. Resentment accumulates when expectations shift without communication or consequence. Consequence does not require punishment. Consequence requires consistency. Consistency during familiarity signals authenticity rather than performance. Performance fades with time. Authenticity holds when behavior remains aligned. Alignment must persist even when effort feels unnecessary or unseen. Unseen discipline builds internal respect and reinforces identity. Identity grounded in discipline remains attractive because it feels stable. Stability reassures others that behavior will not collapse under pressure. Pressure increases naturally as familiarity deepens and expectations grow. Handling pressure calmly preserves attraction by reinforcing reliability. Reliability reduces anxiety and supports relaxed interaction. Relaxed interaction encourages openness without chaos or emotional leakage. Leakage during familiarity reveals unresolved insecurity rather than trust. Trust grows from predictability, not emotional exposure alone. Exposure without predictability destabilizes connection and invites correction attempts. Correction attempts create power struggle and erode attraction further. Avoiding struggle requires maintaining standards silently. Silent maintenance feels firm and non-negotiable. Negotiation reappears when boundaries are explained repeatedly. Explanation during familiarity signals weakening resolve. Resolve must remain steady to prevent gradual erosion. Gradual erosion is dangerous because it feels comfortable until attraction disappears quietly. Quiet loss often surprises those who mistook familiarity for security. Security is maintained through discipline, not assumed through time. Time tests structure rather than replacing it. Structure must remain visible through consistent behavior. Behavior during mundane moments matters more than behavior during heightened emotion. Mundane consistency proves character without theatrics. Theatrics exhaust both parties and distort perception. Distortion creates confusion and emotional misalignment. Misalignment invites withdrawal or conflict. Conflict during familiarity feels heavier because expectations are higher. Preventing conflict requires maintaining clarity through action. Action communicates standards without emotional charge. Emotional charge during familiarity feels invasive and destabilizing. Destabilization undermines trust and accelerates disengagement. Familiarity also tempts excessive availability. Availability without boundaries erodes perceived value. Value diminishes when access becomes unlimited and predictable. Predictability must apply to standards, not access. Access should remain earned through respect and alignment. Alignment must be sustained, not assumed. Assumption weakens vigilance and invites drift. Drift separates behavior from values gradually. Separation produces internal tension and external inconsistency. Inconsistency confuses others and destabilizes attraction. Maintaining internal consistency prevents drift even during comfort. Comfort should deepen respect, not dilute discipline. Discipline maintained quietly preserves attraction long after novelty fades. Novelty always fades. Discipline must remain. Remaining disciplined during familiarity demonstrates maturity. Maturity attracts those seeking depth rather than stimulation. Stimulation seekers disengage when intensity fades. Their departure is alignment, not loss. Retaining the right people requires resisting the urge to relax standards for closeness. Closeness gained through lowered standards creates imbalance and eventual resentment. Resentment poisons connections silently until withdrawal occurs. Withdrawal often happens without explanation because explanation feels unnecessary by then. Preventing withdrawal requires steady enforcement from the beginning. Enforcement must remain calm, predictable, and emotionally neutral. Emotional neutrality during familiarity preserves dignity for both parties. Dignity prevents dependency and maintains mutual respect. Mutual respect sustains attraction through phases of change. Change tests adaptability and discipline simultaneously. Disciplined adaptability preserves core standards while allowing growth. Growth must occur without compromising identity. Identity erosion invites loss of respect and attraction. Identity, strengthened through discipline, becomes familiar without becoming weak. Weakness invites correction or abandonment. Strength invites partnership and longevity. Longevity requires resisting comfort-driven shortcuts. Shortcuts sacrifice long-term connection for temporary ease. Ease feels good initially, but costs attraction eventually. Paying the cost later feels heavier than maintaining discipline now. Maintaining discipline during familiarity requires daily awareness. Awareness prevents automatic behavior driven by habit rather than intention. Intentional behavior reinforces identity and authority continuously. Authority maintained during familiarity discourages entitlement. Entitlement dissolves attraction by creating imbalance. Balance must be protected deliberately as closeness grows. Growth without balance destabilizes connection. Balanced growth supports deeper trust and sustained attraction. Familiarity, handled correctly, deepens connection without weakening presence. Presence maintained through discipline feels reassuring rather than restrictive. Restriction feels controlling. Discipline feels stabilizing. Stabilization attracts those capable of long-term alignment. Alignment preserved through familiarity becomes loyalty rather than dependency. Loyalty rooted in respect lasts longer than attachment rooted in comfort. Comfort fades. Respect remains. This chapter establishes that familiarity must never weaken discipline or standards. When discipline holds, attraction survives time, closeness, and change. Chapter 10. Do not chase attention. Chasing attention dissolves attraction because it reverses polarity and exposes internal dependence. Attention pursued signals scarcity, while attention received signals abundance felt quietly. Scarcity creates pressure, and pressure causes others to retreat instinctively. Retreat is not rejection. Retreat is self-protection from expectation and emotional demand. Expectation attached to interaction poisons presence and distorts intention. Presence should feel offered, not requested or required. Required presence feels heavy and restrictive rather than inviting or free. Freedom attracts because it allows choice without obligation or guilt. Guilt-driven engagement breeds resentment and eventual withdrawal. Withdrawal often happens silently when chasing becomes predictable. Predictability in chasing signals lack of self-command and blurred priorities. Priorities must remain internal rather than reorganized around response or validation. Validation-seeking shifts authority outward and weakens identity gradually. Identity, weakened by validation dependence, becomes reactive and unstable. Instability discourages long-term engagement and respect. Respect remains when attention is optional rather than demanded. Demand feels invasive because it removes autonomy subtly. Autonomy must be preserved for attraction to sustain. Sustained attraction depends on voluntary alignment rather than emotional leverage. Emotional leverage appears through reminders, over-communication, or heightened availability. Availability without discernment communicates excess capacity rather than value. Value increases when time and energy are protected deliberately. Protection requires tolerating silence without anxiety or interpretation. Anxiety during silence reveals attachment to response rather than grounded presence. Grounded presence remains unchanged regardless of attention level. Attention fluctuates naturally due to life demands, priorities, and internal cycles. Fluctuation should not provoke reaction or pursuit. Pursuit during fluctuation creates imbalance and reduces perceived stability. Stability attracts individuals capable of mutual respect and responsibility. Responsibility includes managing one's emotional state without outsourcing reassurance. Reassurance-seeking behavior communicates insecurity regardless of tone or wording. Tone cannot hide need when behavior reveals urgency. Urgency erodes attraction because it suggests fear of loss. Fear of loss transfers power outward and invites disengagement. Disengagement increases when pursuit escalates rather than subsides. Subtraction restores balance more effectively than escalation ever could. Reducing engagement demonstrates self-command and emotional regulation. Regulation preserves dignity during uncertainty or reduced attention. Dignity attracts respect, even during distance. Respect encourages return when conditions realign naturally. Natural return feels effortless because it is not coerced. Coercion creates compliance rather than desire. Desire fades when autonomy is compromised. Autonomy must remain intact for retention to occur. Retention built on freedom feels chosen rather than endured. Endured connection collapses under stress or inconvenience. Stress reveals whether connection is voluntary or obligation-based. Chasing attention converts connection into obligation. Subtly, obligation drains energy and replaces curiosity with avoidance. Avoidance increases when pursuit feels relentless or emotionally loaded. Emotional load arises when attention becomes currency for self-worth. Self-worth must remain internally sourced to prevent dependence. Internal sourcing stabilizes behavior during neglect or delay. Neglect perceived without internal stability triggers overcompensation. Overcompensation exposes vulnerability and invites imbalance. Balance requires stepping back rather than leaning forward emotionally. Stepping back preserves power and restores perspective. Perspective reveals whether alignment exists or has faded. Faded alignment should be acknowledged rather than chased. Chasing misalignment wastes energy and reinforces dependency patterns. Dependency attracts caretakers or controllers rather than equals. Equality supports sustainable attraction and mutual respect. Mutual respect requires space for choice and individuality. Individuality erodes when attention becomes the primary focus. Focus must remain on standards, purpose, and discipline. Discipline anchors identity when external signals fluctuate. Fluctuation should not dictate self-perception or behavior. Behavior anchored internally remains calm and predictable. Predictability during absence builds trust rather than suspicion. Suspicion arises when behavior changes dramatically with attention shifts. Dramatic shifts signal emotional dependence and instability. Instability repels grounded individuals instinctively. Grounded individuals prefer environments where pressure is absent. Pressure-free interaction invites genuine engagement. Genuine engagement feels lighter because it is not monitored or measured. Measuring attention creates tension and self-consciousness. Self-consciousness disrupts presence and authenticity. Authenticity requires comfort with outcome uncertainty. Uncertainty tolerated builds emotional strength and patience. Patience communicates abundance of choice and self-trust. Self-trust stabilizes pacing and discourages impulsive communication. Impulsivity reveals urgency and fear. Fear contaminates attraction quietly and persistently. Removing fear requires accepting loss without resistance. Acceptance restores control by eliminating internal struggle. Internal struggle drains energy and distorts judgment. Judgment guided by calm acceptance leads to healthier decisions. Healthy decisions preserve dignity and long-term alignment. Alignment attracts those capable of consistency and commitment. Commitment thrives where attention is earned, not chased. Earning occurs through behavior, not pursuit. Behavior consistent with standards signals value naturally. Natural signaling replaces effort-based attraction. Effort-based attraction exhausts and collapses under fatigue. Fatigue tempts chasing as a shortcut to reassurance. Reassurance gained through chasing is temporary and costly. Cost accumulates as diminished respect and increased imbalance. Imbalance undermines retention even when attraction exists initially. Retention requires equilibrium maintained through restraint. Restraint, practiced during low attention, strengthens character. Character felt through restraint attracts respect without demand. Respect encourages voluntary engagement rather than compliance. Voluntary engagement sustains attraction longer than pursuit ever could. Pursuit creates asymmetry that destabilizes connection. Asymmetry invites withdrawal, control, or exploitation. Avoiding asymmetry requires letting attention rise and fall without reaction. Reaction exposes attachment and weakens position. Non-reaction preserves power and clarity. Clarity reveals whether connection is mutual or one-sided. One-sided connection should not be chased or repaired. Repairing misalignment undermines self-respect and authority. Authority must remain intact, even when attention fades. Intact authority attracts return when alignment exists. Return that follows restraint feels genuine and respectful. Genuine return supports retention without effort. Effort replaced by steadiness marks maturity. Maturity attracts disciplined individuals seeking depth. Depth requires space rather than pursuit. Space maintained through restraint strengthens attraction naturally. This chapter establishes that attention must never be chased. When chasing stops, dignity returns, balance restores, and the right people remain.